What Buddha understood is that because things are empty of self, the fundamental nature of the universe is this emptiness, is like a pregnant energy that is always turning into the various 10,000 things of the universe.
Welcome to Mind, Body, Health, and Politics. I'm your host, Dr. Richard Lewis Miller. The mission of Mind, Body, Health, and Politics is to enhance your physical and emotional well-being and encourage community. I say encourage community because I believe that human beings are friendly tribal animals, tribal first and foremost, and that we do the best when we live tribally. When we live tribally, we sustain one another emotionally and at times financially and other ways as well. But this is a time in American history when it's worth considering living tribally. Why do I say that? Because 70% of America are living paycheck to paycheck. Because people are going to live with their parents after graduating from college in numbers that we've never seen before. People are waiting longer to get married and much longer to have children. Why is that? For economic reasons. And so for economic reasons, it's worth considering living tribally. My guest today, Peter Coyote, is known to you and known to people worldwide. Theater, movies, narration, writing books, political activism, and more. Welcome to Mind, Body, Health, and Politics, Peter.
Thanks, Richard. It's nice to be here.
Peter, you've been involved in various forms of tribal cooperation and tribal collaboration. Right? Going back, actually, Peter, I met you, I'm sure you don't remember me, but I met you way over 50 years ago when you were with the Diggers, and I think you were with another performance group at the time. And I had an office on, I don't know, it wasn't on California Street, which in the back of the office had like a theater with a stage and chairs. And you and the group used to come over and practice there. And I met you very briefly going back. But I was aware ever since then, having met you, I think Sam Shepard might have been in that group with you, as I recall. I'm not positive.
No, well, the group you're talking about is the San Francisco Mime Troupe.
That's right.
And that was the genesis of the Diggers. The original founders of the Diggers, among which I was one, came out of the Mime Troupe. And we were a group of people that thought we could do more than just kind of transmit a message, no matter how skillfully and comedically, from the stage. When you do that, when you make people laugh, you know you've succeeded in making them see the world exactly the way you do. When you do tragedy, you don't know. Maybe you can make them cry, but you don't know that they're seeing the world exactly the same way. But the Diggers thought that we could push the envelope further and create theater events that no one would know were theater events. And we would pull people into these events to question things like profit and private property and ownership and being an employee and a consumer. And we invented a number of devices to do that. And you know, that tribe is still extant. I have 108 people on email list. We're called the Free Family Union now because we pulled other tribes into this conglomeration, and everybody kicks in something every month. And we're able to support 15 of our people who got old and are indigent. And we can give them $200 a month over and above their Social Security or whatever they scrape together. So while we couldn't live as communally and as tribally on a day-to-day basis, we certainly didn't sacrifice our values.
And that was over 50 years ago when that started.
Yeah.
How do you relate what you stood for then, the values that you stood for then, and what's going on in the country today?
Okay. Well, first of all, values are an invisible quality. And one of the mistakes that we made was confusing it with style. We wanted to set ourselves off from the majority culture, and so we became the counterculture. And there was a lot of imaginative dress and playful explorations of economic relationships, sexuality, you name it. But the underlying values of uh, group support, mutuality, trying to do things without concentrating on profit and private property. The diggers did everything anonymously, and we did everything without money, believing that if you weren't getting rich or famous, you probably believed it. And so we would set up these theater events like a free store, for instance. And in this free store, we had clothes and tools and goods and furniture and bicycles, whatever you needed, televisions, all repaired, all functioning. And the subtext of it, without ever saying it out loud, was, why do you want to become an employee to make the money to become a consumer? We'll give you the stuff for nothing. Now, what do you really want to do? So in this period, let's say what we call the 60s, there was a whole generation of young people coming into agencies, feeling their oats, believing perhaps a little naively the shibboleths and myths of America, and expecting to be heard and understood, and soon running face to face with the entrenched values of private property and profit, because very often we didn't own the houses we lived in. So we could be evicted, or uh, you wound up making private rental arrangements, and you'd have to have 5 or 6 people in a house spreading the rent. Very often landlords didn't like that. And when children came along, uh, very often the groups disintegrated a little because children needed to be near schools. Very often our communes were kind of backwoods and remote. But the separation never felt like people were abandoning the values that brought us together. So what I see between then and now I see the working out of kind of self-centeredness. I see everybody's kind of looking for their own career. Everybody's looking for their own ideas. Everybody's looking for their own well-being and their own economy. And there's very little attention being paid to the we, the group. And you can see that on the planet today, there are cultures like Japan or many indigenous cultures where the idea of an individual success just doesn't exist. It's the tribe that's going to make it, or the tribe that's not going to make it. And I don't know if the United States is going to make it in this form of heightened selfishness. And I don't mean that as a puritanical judgment. I just mean, for instance, the entire political life is organized around money. So from the time the Supreme Court equated political donations with free speech, they threw all the advantage to capital. And then when the Citizens United decision came, they made that capital unlimited and they made it anonymous. So we no longer know who our legislators are indebted to. And we could have a very different electoral system. We could have, as they do in Europe, full federal funding of elections. We could prohibit corporations from spending their money to influence public policy for their shareholders, as opposed to the totality of Americans. And we could prohibit gifts from legislators to lobbyists. And I told this to Jerry Brown one day. We were having coffee together, and he said, "You're exactly right. It'll never happen." And it'll never happen because the entire society is built into the sustaining logic of profit and private property. From the time the news media became profit centers for their corporations, the entire structure of the news changed from what was once nonprofit. And you had people like Walter Cronkite and Huntley and Brinkley and Edward R. Murrow, and the news was universally recognized as the fact basis for decisions. Now they're all seeking profits. They've gotten rid of the old people. They've got young, sexier talking heads reading the news. Every issue is he said, she said. There are lots of experts on there. We don't know the difference between one think tank and another. They never tell us their political persuasion or who funds them. So, for instance, I see the Heritage Foundation on my television all the time. The Heritage Foundation has recently published a 900-page document to upend the American political system, which will start on day one of the next Republican president. They will bring the FBI under the office of the president. They'll fire 50,000 professional civil servants and replace them with acolytes and lackeys. It, page after page after page of remaking America as an autocratic country. And this is really the fruit of self-centered thinking as opposed to we thinking. And the final results are not in. It depends what the voters do when they go to the polls. If they buy, Trump's not even the problem. Trump served his purpose of being the icebreaker to destroy norms and to cast aspersions on the legal system. But he's too crazy. So they'll find somebody like a Marco Rubio or somebody, that can speak coherent sentences that will be backed by the Koch brothers and the oil industry and the gun lobby, which is backing this Project 2025, this 900-page document. So maybe they'll win, maybe they won't. The voters will have to come out and speak decisively and in huge numbers, down ballot as well, to return the Congress to people who want to legislate and work for the good of the nation. And if they don't, the American experiment will be over. It'll sadden me, but it'll be over.
Are you going
That's why they give me the big bucks, Richard.
Well, I know that. And are you going on the stump for this political cause?
Yeah, so I've recently narrated a film called Bad Faith, and you can see the trailer at badfaithdocumentary.com. And it's the story of a guy named Paul Weyrich, who was a very brilliant Republican political operative who realized there was a great deal of political power in the right-wing evangelical and Pentecostal movements. And he's formed these people together with the Koch brothers and with the oil lobby and the gun lobby. And the Koch brothers have made sophisticated computer programs available to them. And they're having, tent meetings of 1,000 people. They're training them to be election workers and disruptors and to, quote, get the devil out of politics. And their job is to remake America as a Christian nation. And they say in this film, in their own words, we'll make you a Christian whether you like it or not. And everything will be subordinated to Christian values as they determine them. And as one guy said, F democracy, I want Christ. So this is a real serious threat. I narrated this movie, and I've been doing Q&As with it and publishing little 5-minute videos on YouTube to talk about democracy, to talk about the difference between Trump and Biden. I'm worried that there are lots of young voters who are angry about the Palestinian-Israeli war.
Yes.
And are furious on one side or another, either at Biden's embrace of Israel or is allowing 2,000-pound bombs to be dropped on Gaza, and
Yes.
They might sit it out. And I'm trying to remind them of a mistake like that me and my activist friends made in the 60s when we refused to vote for Hubert Humphrey because he was tepid on the war in Vietnam.
Yes.
He wasn't as against it as we were.
Right.
So I'm trying to remind them that the line of the worst Democrat that you don't like, he's still on your side of the line, or she. And those Democrats, whether you like them or not, will support women's right to choose. They'll support the availability of mifepristone. They'll support the environment. They'll support Biden's infrastructure programs. They'll support civil liberties. And it's important to remember everybody else, the fascists, the right-wingers, they are on the other side of the line. And if you can't cohere around a centrist Democrat like Biden, he's the candidate, just like Humphrey was the candidate. And we didn't vote for him, and we got Richard Nixon, and then we got Ronald Reagan, and then George H.W. Bush, and neoliberal and big capital in America went to war on the unions, went to war on the environment, sold out the American farmer under the Carter administration by raising interest rates 5 points in a single day and bankrupting all these family farmers they convinced to go into debt to buy heavy equipment. I mean, it was just a panoply of disasters. GATT and NAFTA shipped the jobs out to non-union countries with no health and safety regulations, no environment regulations. Of course, they were cheaper. Anyway, people need to be reminded of this, that life is not a single issue event, and an election shouldn't be a single issue event. And you can vent or virtue signal your righteousness in your display, but the difference is not a competition between two old white men. It's a competition between two different forms of government. And in democracy, even if you lose, you come back and you can fight again and you stay and play. Just think about African Americans if they'd given up after Reconstruction. In an autocracy, when you lose, you're permanently out. There is no recourse higher than the autocrat. So to me, this is an existential moment, and I'm just dedicating most of my spare time up to the election to spreading this information about these people who are hiding as Christians, but they're actually fascists and seeking political power, and they're not doing it for everybody. They're doing it just for Christians. They're not doing it for LGBTQ plus people. They're not doing it for women to give them autonomy. They're certainly not doing it to rein in the oil industry or to rejoin the Paris Accords or to fight for the health and well-being of the planet.
People are listening to this and they're saying, what can I do to help? What can they do to help?
Well, they can do a couple things. They can read a book called Shadow Network by Alice Miller, who was one of the advisors of this film. They can see this movie, badfaithdocumentary.com. They can see the trailer, and they can see the film itself on Amazon Prime, and they can see it for 99 cents on YouTube. And what they can do is have little neighborhood screenings, have people over to see this film and discuss it, because this is not a hit job. This is filming Christian nationalists in their own language, unedited. It's them talking and telling you what they plan to do. And one of the things they plan to be ready for is violence. And you need to know it. The other thing you can do is listen to.
Wait a second. Let me interrupt you right there, Peter.
Yeah.
Violence. I want to hear more about why you're saying that they're planning violence.
Because they tell you they intend to take over the United States and get rid of secular society by any means necessary. They're aligned with militias. They're aligned with these chesty guys who are showing up in the carrying weapons in the school boards, in the library councils, in the PTA meetings. These guys are not participating in a democratic debate. These guys are there to bully you and drive, just like the Christian nationalists drove the moderates out of the Republican Party. You see them resigning in droves. And we've got the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the Matt Gaetzes. You know, these guys are not legislating, the Jim Jordans. They're not leading. They're just creating disturbance and demonstrating that government can't work. And violence was January 6th. Those were Trump's foot soldiers. And those will be the only place that he can find those votes again among the radical Pentecostal right wing and the radical evangelical right wing. I won't even call them Christians because they're not. So you can see this movie. You can start doing screenings. We're showing them in schools and theaters around Northern California. You can do that. You can organize to make sure that people understand that in an existential struggle between democracy and autocracy, it doesn't matter if you don't like Joe Biden. It doesn't matter if you're angry at him. What you're voting for is democracy. And every vote that you hold back goes to Trump. It just works that way in a two-party system. So those are just the first couple of things that you can do.
Getting together in tribal gatherings and watching this film, Bad Faith, and you're recommending also buying this book, Shadow Network, and reading that.
Alice Nelson.
Alice Nelson.
Yeah, it'll show you a lot about the history of how these people have sought and gained power. And the third thing you can do is listen to Rachel Maddow's brilliant podcast called Ultra. And it's the story of a parallel movement in America during World War II, where 27 members of Congress were working for the Nazis. And the people who were trying to uncover it were blocked politically at every turn. And these people were robbing military bases and stealing machine guns and plastic explosives. They were seriously bad guys. And every trial that we had for them fell apart. Like the legal system was not up to the job of reining them in. They were too politically connected. And when this prosecutor, Robbie, was fired for his job, he had just come back from Germany, where he pored over captured German documents. He interviewed Ribbentrop, he interviewed Goering, and he got from the Germans the whole network of America, who they were paying, how much they were paying them. And there was a serious fascist threat to our country at that time, which the president himself was blocking Robbie from articulating because he said it was too explosive. And it's a great education. So all these guys on television, the MAGA people who are decrying Biden's manipulation of the Department of Justice, it's exactly what they said at the time, calling the press fake news, exactly what the Nazis said in the 1940s, the same playbook. And they were powerful senators and congressmen backed up by great fortunes. And you should listen to this Ultra any place you can get a podcast.
Do we know what happened to these people, Peter?
Well, I'm in the last episode. I'm halfway through the last episode. And this fellow Roddy has been fired by the Department of Justice.
Yeah.
And he's just sitting down to face the nation in front of the television cameras to tell what he knows, because he feels that even though he's breaking Department of Justice protocol, this is such a clear and present danger that the American people need to vote consciously, and they need to have this information. And he's just going over the heads of everyone to release it. And so I probably have another 15 minutes before I know what actually happened.
Okay.
It's a podcast, Richard.
Yeah.
So you just listen.
Ultra, everybody.
The other thing that people can do,
yes,
is to be very careful when you're discussing with politics with people, that you don't lose your temper, that you don't judge the other people as evil, that you just ask them questions, why they believe that. And to say, well, if you knew X, would that change the way you felt about it? Because very often we think we're protected by our good intentions. We think our anger is righteous, and the anger of the blue collar and urban and rural people that invaded the Capitol, that's an invalid anger. Everybody's got a point of view. And in a democracy, we try to discuss and persuade, and you never persuade once you're shouting. So being a Buddhist priest, it's my practice to try to talk to people, tendering them full respect, not pointing my finger, not virtue signaling, but trying to find out what they think and why, and make sure they have information. And it's difficult today because much of the information that you could use is discredited. People don't want to believe the New York Times because they've been told it's New York Jews, or it's, the Democratic propaganda organ. So they'll believe Fox News. But there is such a thing as facts, and we need to get the conversations back to facts. And if we don't, I'm afraid America's over.
People don't realize that a democracy and a republic can fail. The experiment can fail, and we can lose the democracy and the republic.
Absolutely right. And there are people right now in Congress that are doing everything they can to disrupt it and demonstrate to people that government is useless. And why are they doing this? Because the corporate sector hates government because it understands that government is the only institution that can handcuff them from throwing their waste into the air, the soil, and the water, from exploiting labor, from pumping their toxins out, from shipping their jobs overseas. So they've spread this propaganda that government itself is the enemy. That's what Ronald Reagan did. That's why the neoliberals put him in power. The people who believe that markets are a sacred institution that should never be governed or limited in any way. And that's who's been running things onward and upward for the last 60 years, since Lewis Powell published his memo to the National Chamber of Commerce, laying out a blueprint that the Republicans have followed in lockstep discipline since 1968. He showed them what to do. You build think tanks, you put television and radio stations in them, you buy your authors, you publicize them, you use your power as advertisers to lean on universities, to lean on television stations, to demand that the free enterprise system gets more coverage. Lewis Powell was made a Supreme Court justice by Richard Nixon. He was not a nobody. And when you look at what he accomplished over the last 60 years, you have to tip your hat because they were incredibly disciplined and they have shifted America to the right.
The plan that you describe that takes place in the movie Bad Faith is actually one that the Koch brothers have been working on for many years in terms of setting up cells all around the country.
And, you know, they have an institution called ALEC, which is something like the American legislative something, where they basically write legislation for legislators who were in their pocket. They tell them, this is the legislation we want you to pass. And they have the money to determine if someone stays in office or not. And this is why if I'm not so sanguine, it's because we're so enmeshed with money that even the best legislators, even the best people, have to consider what happens if I make this vote. You know, Barbara Boxer was a friend of mine, and Barbara Boxer had to vote for, I think it was the F-16 fighter jet, which nobody wanted. The Army didn't want it. The Pentagon didn't want it. The people who wanted it were the shareholders of the company that built it. And so she had to ask herself, do I say no to this and they mount another candidate to fight against me and maybe knock me out of office? Or do I give them what they need so I stay in office and I can fight for the rights of women, for the environment, for education, for beneficent legislation? Well, our legislators should not be forced to choose between their own survival and their intellect and their emotions. They shouldn't be leveraged by money. So, but, you know, I'm just like Jeremiah shouting into the wilderness here, because that's how our whole system works. If 80% of the people want reasonable gun legislation and nothing happens, doesn't it tell you that the Congress is working or in thrall to the 20%? I mean, it's pretty clear. You don't have to be a rocket scientist. And that's why nothing happens. And people will say, we've got to get the money out of politics, but no one ever discusses it. It's a taboo. Well, how would you do that? What would you do? Out of all these 24-hour-a-day news shows, chattering, talking, opinions, nobody talks about the Gordian knot binding all the bullshit in our system together, which is money and the power money has to control our system. So, you know, I'm not so sanguine that things are going to get better.
Peter, over 50 years ago, when I first met you en passant, you already knew, as well as the friends, the people you associated with, that capitalism has an inherent flaw that favors a very few and disfavors everybody else. You were aware of that. You were critically aware of that.
Yes. But lately, as I've gotten older, I've looked at it a little differently. And what I say is not capitalism, but unregulated capitalism. Because I've lived in European countries. I've lived in Spain. I've lived in France. I've lived in Italy. I've lived in England. And basically what socialism is capitalism with rules. You still can be an entrepreneur. You still can make a fortune here and there, but the people say, there's a couple of things we want to take for ourselves. We don't want a profit made out of light, heat, power, medicine, mass transit. I don't know, maybe something else. Let those things run the post office. Let those things run break even. They don't have to make a profit because we're already paying for them with our taxes. The rest of it you can leave entrepreneurial. So to me, it's the fact that the neoliberals have held sway for a long time, since the time of Ronald Reagan, the Chicago schoolboys, and their ideas that markets are like a sacred entity that should never be regulated. And we're living in the fruits of that. We're living in a culture that has refused to regulate markets, whereas all of our allies in Europe just reasonably regulate markets for the common good. They're not poor. England is not poor. France is not poor. Italy is not poor. Spain is not poor. There are inequities, there are imbalances, but you don't see the streets filled with homeless people. I can go into a doctor's office in France. Actually, he'll come to my house for 20 euros. And if I need blood drawn, a lab will come to my house for 20 euros. In England, it's free. Now, it may not be what a millionaire would like, but the millionaire is free to buy what he can afford. But at least there's a level under which no one will fall. And that's the difference between a civilized country and a jungle.
Peter, if you get together with a couple of old digger friends and play Monopoly starting on Friday afternoon, and you play for a couple of days on and off, we all know that at some point, a couple of people are going to have all the money and everybody else at the table is going to have very little. And Monopoly is the ultimate capitalist game. And so I'm not sure I quite resonate yet to regulated capitalism as an answer, because capitalism, like monopoly, has built into it that a very few are going to end up with everything. Because of critical mass, it's like a snowball running down a hill. And
well, remember, Richard, there are no taxes in monopoly.
Well, that's
right.
That's
taxes are a regulation. Taxes are the way you soften the inequities. You don't end them. Of course, you're not going to have a one-size-fits-all graham cracker culture. But here's an example. In the 1950s, when I was growing up, the average salary of a CEO was about 70 times the wage of a mid-level employee. Nobody minded them being rich. That was it. Today, it's over 700 times. Right. Look at all the transactions in hedge funds, the trillions of dollars that are moving. They're not building anything. They're just generating capital. And a 2-cent tax on those transactions could generate billions of dollars for daycare, for cheaper medicine, for better unemployment benefits. So regulations are just ways of saying, okay, great levels of inequity are a problem. You wind up with guys looking like Mike Tyson behind you at the auto teller. You have snatch and grab robberies places. Crime is self-employment. And when black unemployment is over 40%, people are not going to just dry up and wither like the shmoo in Little Abner. They're going to figure out a way to get what they need. Well, they have to do that because there's no province made for them by the government. The government does not collect taxes on an equitable basis. Sales taxes and use taxes hurt the poor much more than it hurts the rich. And people like Warren Buffett come out and say, I'm paying less taxes than my secretary. That's not right. In the time of the New Deal, taxes, I think over $1 million, were like 80%. You still had rich people buying chauffeurs and big homes and, balls and extravaganzas. But you had to have a base for the country to run, the people who do the work to get compensated, to have enough savings for their old age, to have affordable medicine, to be able to, well, when I was a kid, you didn't even need daycare because on the salary of one husband or wife, you could raise an entire family and send your kids to school. So what happened? Is this what we call inflation? I don't believe it. Because if this was inflation, why would the US be the number one economy in the world? No one is talking about about corporate gouging. The corporations are reporting record profits in the Wall Street Journal every day. You can read them, open it up. You can read about them bragging about their profits. Meanwhile, gasoline is $5 a gallon. Who's it hurting? It's hurting working people that have to commute to work.
That's right.
Private PG&E, private utilities, their profits go up. They're paying their boards of directors the CEO over $1 million, $2 million. That's money that's coming out of the pockets of working men and women. So yeah, that's raw capitalism. That's neoliberalism.
You heard in my introduction saying that 70% of the country are living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
And that is not sustainable.
Accident can wipe out an American family.
That's correct.
An ambulance, a car trouble. So here's the question. And this is the question, let's say, with race relations. This is a good way to look at it. Relations and the protections of the Constitution depend on the current white minority. African Americans are about 14% of the population.
Yes.
That means they need about 37% of white people to join them if they're going to get policies that offer them the protections of the Constitution. So where's that 37%? How can we sit by if we are white people, if we're educated? How can we sit by and let 13 or 14% of our population, that's just the African American population. We've got Latino, we've got Asian, Vietnamese, Laos, Cambodian. How can we let these people do our work and remain outside the protections of our Constitution without being hypocrites, without just saying, well, we're skinning the cream. It's not really my problem. I'm nice to every Negro I meet. We're talking about systemic problems.
Yes.
And unless the supposed educated majority begins to have a tribal feeling toward all other citizens of the United States and include them under the shelter of their umbrella, which is the Constitution, you're going to have these heightened levels of privilege, and you're going to have those people outside those levels of privilege. And, after 100 or so years after slavery, it's hard to blame African Americans or minorities for being a little cranky about it.
Where do you think the people on the other side of the line, where do you think they're coming from when they look at the 70% who are living paycheck to paycheck and could be wiped out with a $500 bill?
Well, I think they're largely living in a Calvinist worldview. They're believing that they're special people, that they are rewarded by God, and the proof of that is their wealth. And consequently, those rewards indicate that they should be the people that lead. None of them are following the teachings of Jesus. That's not how he behaved. So, to me, the irony is we call it a Christian nation, but it's not. I was once trapped for a weekend in the edge of the Bonneville Salt Flats in a little motel, and it had a Bible in the desk drawer, and it was raining for 3 days. And Jesus's words were in red ink in the Bible. And when you read just what Jesus said, it was a radical, progressive, universalist, caring, loving prophet that was talking. Now, when you listen to some of the dummies that followed him, like Paul, who was cozying up to the Romans and wanted to make everything work with them, they had the swords and the money. But if you go to Jesus himself, he was spot on. There's nothing he said that I disagree with as a Buddhist priest. So I think those people have redefined Christianity in a Calvinist way. They believe that they've been rewarded. And let's also not steer away from the fact that most of them had a lot of help. They never talk about the trust funds they inherited, the amount of money they inherited, or the good educations that they got, nor do they talk about the way the legal system has protected them or the highway system, all built by taxpayers, has moved their goods safely, or that the electrical grid, paid for by taxpayers, has made their factories possible. So nobody does it alone. The universe is an interdependent organism, and we're all connected. And to isolate yourself and set yourself apart from everyone else is just an act of hubris and ignorance.
But basically what you're saying is that they're taking the attitude of, I got here and I wouldn't have gotten here unless I was supposed to get here. So since I was supposed to get here, I can enjoy being here. The being here meaning having tons of money or privilege or whatever the special thing is that they've achieved.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it works. It's comfortable for them. It's a nice way to think. You don't have to feel guilty. You don't have to look at the ways in which you've beaten up your maid or your babysitter to pay her less than she needs, or that you're not paying your employees a living wage. You can feel gracious. Who's more gracious than the Sackler family? While they were peddling opioids, they were opening museums and paying for the opera and smiling and drinking champagne and tea and killing hundreds of thousands of Americans relentlessly and protecting their investments and bribing doctors. We all know this.
Oh, yes, we do. Oh, yes, we do. You said one thing earlier, Peter, that I want to take a slight issue with.
Okay.
Which is, you sounded somewhat pessimistic about the possibility of our changing something that is so entrenched. And you've made an excellent case for how entrenched the corruption and the deviousness, how entrenched the system is. You've made a great case for that. And it's easy to make a jump from this system is so entrenched, and Citizens United puts cement on top of the entrenchment, and the lobbyists put even more cement and throw Jimmy Hoffa in the cement with it. And so we're stuck.
No,
it's not.
Fair enough, but I'll counter it. Okay, Richard?
I hope you will.
Yeah.
Because my counter is, we overthrew the King of England and we overthrew the Pope when we became the president, the United States of America. And although there's a lot of good that we needed to do after we did that, that basic move of moving from being subjects to being citizens was historical. It was the first in thousands of years.
Absolutely.
And it was tremendously surprising because England had the greatest army and navy on the planet, and we had a bunch of farmers. Really, literally.
I get you. I'm with you.
And not only that, of the few million people that we had in this country, 1/3 of them sided with England.
Yeah.
And another third of them said, I think I'll sit this one out. So really what we had was a percentage of the whole, and it was much less than half. And it was only less than 60 people who organized the whole thing. Less than 60, right? Leaders.
Do you know how old they were?
Yes.
Alexander Hamilton was 18.
I know that.
Thomas Jefferson was 30.
I know that.
George Washington was 40.
Yeah, it's
astounding how young they were.
The only oldie in the whole group was Ben Franklin.
Yeah.
They were young people, but it's not a matter of age. I mean, as an aside, I went down to Cuba to join the revolution as a late teenager, and when I met Fidel and Che Guevara and Raul, they were all in their 20s. They were just young guys, right?
Yep.
So we did that, Peter, and that's my argument for why it's still possible.
So let me tell you how I look at this.
Yes.
So when I tell you how entrenched and how difficult things are, I just try to be really straight ahead and factual. I'm
Yes.
not I'm not trying to color code it. But I practice something I call radical optimism.
Ah,
And radical optimism is based on one incontrovertible fact. And that fact is we never know how things are going to turn out. So given that, given the existence of surprise, given the existence of unforeseen and unintended consequence, my spirits up and my energy up and my shoulder to the wheel keeps me in play,
here, here.
keeps me powerful. And it's kind of like buying a lottery ticket. The odds may be very slim, but I bought the ticket. I'm in play. If I don't buy a ticket, no chance that I can win. If I surrender to depression and despair and I stop my efforts, no chance that my agenda is going to come through.
Here,
So
here.
that's why I call it radical optimism. And it's just based on the fact that we don't know how things are going to turn out. So why not give it your best? And that means staying healthy, staying happy, staying committed and energetic, and never giving up.
Here, here. And I love hearing that from another man who's in his 80s.
Yeah, 82.
I turned 85 about a couple
Oh,
of months
good for
ago.
you, man. I got married at 82. I just got remarried in October of this year.
Well, fantastic.
How's that for optimism?
I well, the last time I got married, I was 74, so I'm sort of somewhat behind you. Oh, that is terrific. That is
Yeah.
really terrific. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. You know, I remember you from those days, and I couldn't exactly place where. As soon as I saw your name, I said, wait, I know that guy. I had something to do with him, but I'm at that age where I can barely remember breakfast. But I knew that we had had some kind of gesture in the past.
Well, more recent past than 50 years ago, when you were with the mime troupe and the diggers, was we went to the same gym together in Corte Madera,
Oh, that's
and
it with George.
with George Ashtashkarian,
That's right.
and
God bless you. Thank you.
it was there that we chatted. And when you found out that I was a clinical psychologist, you shared with me that your daughter is a psychologist.
That's right. She's a PsyD.
That's right. How's she doing?
She's doing fabulously. She was just here visiting me for 3 days, and she's looking for a house in this neighborhood to be near her old dad. And
Oh,
she's her granddaughter just graduated from high school this month and is been accepted at UC Santa Barbara. She was actually accepted everywhere she applied, and she's a happy, loving family, and she thinks I'm great. And she grew up in the time that I was craziest. I mean, a heroin user and communes and this and that, and
well,
pretty ragged life.
well, I wish you wouldn't have put heroin user and communes in the same sentence.
Okay, I was also shooting up in my car, but
Fair,
communes
fair,
is okay.
fair enough. No, because I really believe in communes, and there's a movement going on in the United States, back to communards, and there are some powerful communes going on in San Francisco right now. And I'll mention one to you called. You can check it out on Google because I think you'll enjoy reading about their philosophy. It's called Embassy Network.
Uh huh.
And check that one out. And they've got branches around the world.
I will do that.
And tell your daughter to look up my books on Amazon. I've got some books in psychology that she might be interested in. A couple on
Okay.
psychedelic medicine,
Well,
and
that's something that she's interested in. I mean, my wife, we're all sort of plant medicine people.
well, I've got 3 books out on psychedelic medicine, and another one coming out in a few months. And so I'm involved with that whole movement and have been for a
So,
long
which one
time.
should I start them on?
Well, it depends on where they want to go in because the books are on different things. One is called Psychedelic Medicine, And there I interviewed the leading scientists in the United States on what they were doing in the psychedelic medicine research world.
Okay.
And it's still up to date. And so if you want to know what the scientists are saying, that's the book. Another one called Psychedelic Wisdom. I interviewed people in their 70s and 80s who have been mostly professionals who have been experimenting underground, sub rosa, for the last 30 or 40 years, hardly ever telling anybody. And I got them to out themselves and talk about their psychedelic experiences.
Have you read Swimming in the Sacred?
I interviewed her on my
Uh-huh.
program.
Yeah.
Yes, I have.
And do you know Julia Holland?
Julie Holland, I've interviewed several
Oh
times,
yeah.
and
Okay. Well,
and
so
I'm a big fan of Julie's,
me too.
particularly because she brought to light the fact that women that were taking SSRIs and taking birth control pills were bringing on an interaction that were playing havoc with their emotions. And
Uh-huh.
that was a very important book. And I think it was called Crazy Bitches
Uh-huh.
because the women were being accused of pathology and of being nuts when in fact it was their neurotransmitters that were
Wow.
being played with by taking SSRIs and birth control. That was a big contribution that Julie made.
So my wife was a nurse, was director of public nursing in Napa for 30 years. And this is one of the areas that we're really into, these networks of women and women's wisdom as expressed many cases as plant medicine.
Well,
So
well, then you'll be interested in my book after that, which is not about psychedelics, but it's called Freeing Sexuality. And
yes, that
I
sounds that
and
sounds like me.
and I oh, that's nice. I I I interviewed a lot of women coming at sexuality from different perspectives. But one of the important aspects of the book is pointing out how women have been subjugated in all ways for thousands of years, and especially sexually.
So
And
do you know the work of Ryan Eisler?
yes, of course.
Yeah. Okay. So that my wife teaches her books. She
Oh,
runs book groups about Ryan Eisler. So
Ryan Eisler is the vagina monologues.
is she?
I think so, isn't
No, she
she?
didn't. No, no, no. That was Eve Ensler.
Oh, thank you. That was my age.
Ryan Eisler
Ensler,
wrote a book.
Eisler.
Ryan Eisler wrote a book called Sacred Pleasure,
Yes.
which was about the overthrow of matriarchal collaborative cultures by the warrior herder cultures in about 5000 BC. And, how it changed to systems of oppression and against, feminine instincts and ruling by fear of pain. It's a very brilliant book.
Thank you. I thank you. So, what I'm going to do now is take a little pause, and I'm going to ask. I'm going to be talking, and while I'm talking, I'm going to give a little commercial, not to sell something, but about the program. And I want you to think about what else you want to say during this interview for our listeners before at the end.
Okay,
What do
very
you
well.
what might you have missed, or what do
Will
you want
do.
to add?
Will
Okay,
do.
all right.
Yep. Thank you so much.
And while I'm doing that, I want to remind all of you listeners, first of all, thank you for listening and for participating in this social experiment. I think you all know that at the bottom of everything I'm doing is a strong belief in the importance, the imperative of social justice. That might be at the base of all of it, even before capitalism, because if we really take care of one another in this world and take the attitude that we're in it together, everything else could fall into place. We broadcast every week, 9 o'clock, there's a new program. Most of you don't have time to do it at 9 o'clock on Tuesday, so I refer you to my archive, mindbodyhealthpolitics.org. All of the archives are open source. That means free. That means no box tops. You don't have to send in anything. There's no fees for you. Also, you can follow me on the social media. We're now involved with them. And one of the things I'm doing on the social media is giving away health tips, the best tools that I have found in my 64 years of clinical practice. It's sort of, these are the things that have worked for me. I'm sharing them with you. So now back to Peter Coyote.
So thank you, Richard. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, because I get so exercised, I can forget to talk about the central organizing principle in my life, which is Buddhist practice. So I'm an ordained Zen priest, and I'm what's called a transmitted teacher. My teacher has transmitted his authority to me so that I could ordain my own priests and establish my own lineage. And I wanted to talk about the utility of Buddhism as a way of understanding the world, as a way of becoming intimate with your emotions and gaining control over them. And I'll do it briefly. So the Buddha discovered that everything in the world is connected to everything else. He called it dependent origination. You can understand it immediately when you understand that we've never been separate from oxygen, from sunlight, from water, from microbes in the soil, from pollinating insects, from the people who grow the cotton, harvest the cotton, spin it, sew it, ship it, sell it, even to the Earth's existence in the solar system. If we were closer to the sun, water would burn off, we wouldn't be here. If we were farther away, it would freeze, we wouldn't be here. And the Earth is being held where it is by all the forces of the universe. And we're connected to all of that. So the implication of that to Buddha was what he called emptiness. If I'm subsequently made up of all these non-self parts, you really can't find the self as an isolated, fixed entity anywhere. You can't take an apple apart and find the core of appleness. You can't take a tree apart and find the core of treeness. And if I ask you to find yourself, it has no color, it has no shape, it has no location. So we all have self-awareness. Nobody's saying that's false, but it's also true that the self is not, I don't know what's happening. Oh, Siri is talking to me. It's also true that we don't exist in the way we think we do. And that's actually great good news, because when we understand that the thing we call I, me, mine, the self, is literally just an awareness. It's an awareness that's been discussed and talked about so often since we were infants, before we had anything to compare to. Oh, what a good boy, what a good girl, what a nice cheek, look at the doggy, look at the cat. By the time we're 5 or 6, we can run the movie without help, and we are initiated in the culture. What Buddha understood is that because things are empty of self, the fundamental nature of the universe is this emptiness, is like a pregnant energy that is always turning into the various 10,000 things of the universe. Just emptiness is form, form is emptiness. That's one of the great teachings. So when you really think about that, and when you practice meditation and you sit and you don't run away from your thoughts, you eventually learn that you can contain them. And we learn that because the Buddha taught us what he called 4 noble truths. And I'm going to repeat them because they'll go along with what I've just said about emptiness. They'll make sense. So when Buddha had his enlightenment experience, he walked back, he sat in the forest for 49 days, trying to figure out, how am I going to teach? How am I going to help people? And he walked back. He wasn't Deepak Chopra. He wasn't famous. He was just this guy that had been starving himself to death with all these other guys. And he'd had this breakthrough, and he realized that there is no fixed entity of the self. There is no separate self, which is separate from the rest of the universe. And it reorganized his thinking in a very total way. So he came back and he figured out this way of explaining how to live to them. And this is what he said. The first noble truth is called dukkha. and Christian translators translated it as suffering. But it's kind of a worrisome translation. It tends to be mental, tends to make you think that it's not the being ill that's the suffering, it's the worrying about it. What Buddha used the word dukkha. It's a Sanskrit word, and he defined it. He said dukkha is being born, it's dying, it's grieving, it's loss, it's physical pain, it's being trapped in a situation you can't get out of, and it's being denied a situation you can't get into. And he called it a noble truth. So truth means real, and noble means worthy of dignity, worthy of respect. And what he's telling you is it's not your fault. If you're suffering, if you're afflicted, that's the word he used. That's the English word. If you're afflicted, it's not your fault. You're not afflicted because you're spiritually undeveloped or because there's something wrong with you. We all live in a peppered wind. It's what stirs the pot. It's if you get too cold, you move closer to the fire. If you get too hot, you move away. So it's a noble truth. So the second noble truth was
Wait. Before you go on
Yep.
to the second one,
All right.
is the first noble truth suffering, or
Well,
is it living the
we
life?
call it, well, we don't use the word suffering. I mean, I don't. I
Yes.
use the word affliction, meaning there's something always sort of pushing us around, moving us. I call it like being in a peppered wind. It's not always comfortable. And that's just reality. Living. You could call it living.
But
But
does that take into account the times when there is no suffering?
yes, but let me finish and you'll see the whole picture.
I will.
Okay. So when we're afflicted, the second noble truth is samudaya, which means arising. When someone cuts us off in the car, we get frightened, we get angry, we get vengeful. Any number of things can happen. That's not your fault either. It's just an immediate response. Someone's rude to us, someone takes your space, someone's affectionate with you. The mind, the body, the emotional system just throws up responses. That's also a noble truth. It's
What we call reactions.
yeah.
It's a reaction, actually, rather than a response.
Yes, exactly. So the third noble truth is the first one you can do something about, and it's called nirodha. And what the word means in Pali or Sanskrit was a clay wall that peasants built around a fire pit to stop the flames from leaping into the village and burning it down or leaping into the crops. And the flames for Buddha were the passions. And what he taught is that by meditating, you can learn that you can contain whatever arises. So most of us get in trouble when we're running away from painful thoughts or uncomfortable situations. We wind up shopping too much. We wind up drinking too much, taking drugs, winding up in the wrong bed. It's not a dignified life. Let's just put it that way. When you meditate, you develop a faith that's based on experience, that you can sit with whatever comes up, investigate it, let it come. You don't have to invite it for tea, and let it go. Everything's always changing. You can't hold on to a good mood. You can't hold on to a bad mood. Once you've developed the faith that you can contain what comes up, then the last of the four noble truths is called marga, and it's the path. It means just living. And you're just living according to the Buddhist precepts, which are things that you look to your own inner nature to advise you about. Am I looking at things in the right way? Is it Buddhist view? Am I speaking kindly and respectfully to others? Am I earning my livelihood in a way that hurts people or doesn't? Am I making the right effort? Am I making the right concentration and mindfulness? And mindfulness in Buddhism has a very specific term, because since our inner nature is actually the same emptiness as the entire universe, And since the universe is half positive and half negative, we as human beings are half positive and half negative. So the idea of thinking yourself as the good guys is a dangerous delusion. Because if you think of yourself as the good guys, why be mindful? Why watch yourself? You've already decided you're good. You've taken all the shadow sides and bad sides, and you put them on other people you call enemies.
Well,
So
but it's a little more complicated, if I may, than that, because it's one thing to think of yourself as good, but it's another thing to make sure that you act good. So I can believe, for example, in the foundational principles that I used when I started the health sanctuary at Wilbur Hot Springs in 1972, and the foundational principles were dignity, respect, kindness, and love. But it's one thing to have those as principles. It's another thing to walk around acting with dignity, respect, kindness, and love, to actual
exactly.
keep manifesting, not right?
Exactly right. Well, the problem with thinking of yourself as the good guys is that you're not alert then to what can get past your teeth or what can be innervated by your muscles. So if you know that you're a human being, and a human being who's not being alert to their inner life can be very dangerous, that's why we're mindful. We're cataloging and watching what arises to make sure we don't leak envy or competition or jealousy, and seize precepts, Buddhist views, speech, action, livelihood, effort. These are just the little ways we check on ourselves and ask ourselves at our deepest nature, am I doing this in a way? Am I modeling the life of a Buddha with my life? And that's the way you move through the world, to model a life of dignity and kindness and helpfulness. And you can only do that if you've understood the other three noble truths and if you've done the meditation practices to sit and fearlessly entertain whatever arises in you so you're not afraid of your humanity. And
So
when you do, go ahead, sorry.
the sitting is really a way of what in psychology we call introspecting, or raising your awareness, looking at yourself going through the world, witnessing, so that you can self-correct, because we all make all kinds of silly things and stupid things if we don't watch ourselves. But if we watch ourselves, and meditation is a way of watching ourselves inside, we have an opportunity to sculpt ourselves into the kind of person that fits with the principles we believe in. Otherwise, we could have principles we believe in, but we could act another way. They would be
I,
what Carl Rogers called an incongruent person, who talks one way and acts another way, right?
sure. I
Um,
mean, I agree with that. I would use maybe slightly different
Language.
language,
Yeah.
because remember, for a Buddha, you don't have to attach these impulses, these things coming over the spinal telephone, to a self. It's the universe that's blowing through you.
Yes.
And these mental events, although they're filled with elements of your personal history, everyone knows love, everyone knows anger, everyone knows jealousy, everyone knows envy. And yes, all the props and accoutrements and experiences of your life come up, but they're basically thoughts and feelings and sensations. And once you liberate them from an idea of a self, then you're just putting your awareness on them. The meditation allows you to put your attention in your body and your breathing, and uh, free yourself a little bit from a slavish attachment to your thoughts, which just jerk you around. You know,
I totally agree with you about that, because so many people think that their thoughts are imposed on them, whether they like it or not, and
yeah,
have no realization that they really are the boss, and the computer is not the boss. But it wants to be. You know that the
you
mind
bet.
wants to be the boss and take over. You
Well,
know,
that's the limit. That's the problem with the ego, is that it thinks it's the most important person
right?
on earth,
It wants
but
to
it's
be the boss.
but it's not.
I'm getting signals here. I'd love to talk to you more, because I'm in my mind, as you're talking about Buddhism, I'm connecting it to my studies of Stoicism and Marcus Aurelius and Zeno. And
I love Marcus Aurelius.
yes, I'm sure you do, because there's a direct connection between the Buddhism you're describing and the Stoicism that Marcus Aurelius practiced. And it wasn't a Stoicism the way it's typically used in our culture, which is to be withdrawn, but it was more it was a Stoicism of responding rather than reacting.
Exactly. So can I just plug my newest book?
I want you to. That's where I was headed next as we end up. Let's hear about it.
So I have a new book, which is called Zen in the Vernacular. And it's to loosen the Japanese gift wrapping around the Buddha's teachings and explain it to Americans in colloquial vernacular speech. Zen in the Vernacular. You can find it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or pretty much any place they sell books. And it talks about all the things that I've been covering in detail. And, it's nice to have it in print. You can refer back to it and you don't have to rewind the tape of this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. This has been a great conversation.
Well, I'm glad it was for you, Peter. And thank you, gentle listeners, for being with us on this broadcast of Mind, Body, Health, and Politics. I hope you've enjoyed our interview with Peter Coyote. You can find him on Google, find his book, find some of his political work. He's done some great things for our culture. You want to take a look much deeper.
And YouTube. You can go to my channel on YouTube and see my Dharma talks.
Okay, thank you for that too. Until next time, this is Dr. Richard Lewis Miller reminding you that good health is worth fighting for, and it's essential for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.